Okay. So I first just want to say thanks to the organizers. They saved the best for last. She couldn't be here today, so you're stuck with me. That sucks for you guys. We're going to talk about unsucking your team's development environment because, spoiler alert, most team development environments are less than great. I'm Zach Holman. I'm Holman on Twitter, Holman on GitHub, and I work for GitHub. You may notice us from such places as Where You Host Your Code or Last Night's Beach Party. And I just wanted to start out sort of telling a quick story about a queue. We have a queue at GitHub. We've had it for a while. A specific queue I'm talking about here. And this queue sort of worked. We put some objects in, a task occurs, that's awesome. And then we start realizing, oh shit, we have some blocking operations. That's unfortunate, but we looked at our data, saw what was going on, and we're like, oh, we can split this into two separate categories. It's a very easy split for us. Then they can both be going at the same time, and it'll be great. Then we upped those queues, got some more throughput, because we were facing lots of exponential growth going on here. And that was great for a while until we started seeing more and more bottlenecks. This is basically the toilet situation at the GitHub offices, and it sucks because I have to wait to do my business. And I don't want that. You started out with one bathroom, and now we got like two bathrooms, and it's like cool, and it's really frustrating to me. I was thinking about this recently, but while I was waiting to use the toilet, and I realized it was because of this. In 2008, we had 5 employees. 2009, 8. Then I went to 14, 54 at the end of 2011, and today we're at 114/116, somewhere around there. This growth is a lot. This is a lot of people. In the last few years, we've grown a ton. Because of this, we've ended up thinking a lot about the onboarding process. How can you bring people onto your team and not drive them crazy, and not drive you crazy. And it's not just about toilet latency, although that's also important to me. A really good metric to look at here is sort of the duration from when you first step into the office on your first day of work to when you can boot up the particular app that you're working on. 2.5 years ago when I started, this took me about a week. Because one, we didn't really know what our dependencies were. It was all kind of a mess. You had to find this stuff out. My computer was all messed up, and I'm not that smart. So it took me a long time before I could get to a bootable working instance that I could work on. Today, a new employee can get up and running in 20 minutes. And that is a completely different playing field for us. What's more than that, it took me about a week to do one app, and in those same 20 minutes, you can boot every single app that we use internally at GitHub and start working on it immediately once you get hired. This is really important for us because we want new hires to sort of ship something by the end of the week. Either that's some design tweak they've wanted to add for a long time, or there's some bug that's frustrated them. We just want them to get code out into production right away. And if you're waiting on some crazy environment setup, that really kind of poisons your whole idea about working at that company. So this talk is about thinking through how you can make your environment suck less. Because any sort of pain that you experience or that your employees experience is going to be multiplied across your organization. And as you grow, you're going to waste more time, you're going to get more and more people frustrated, and it's just not a good place to be. So I'm going to talk about 4 things. I'm going to talk about the company overall, and then the deploy, and then stack, and then the app. And I want to talk about the app first. I think the app is fascinating because it's the foundation of kind of everything. If you screw up the development environment for a particular app, that kind of blows everything. I'm just going to go out and say I think every app should have a one-liner install. This is either, if we're talking about open source or an internal app that you have, or whatever the case is, I think it should be installable with one quick command line installation. And I think that's really the case, no matter how complex it is. Even large projects can have this sort of tutorial style setup. I have a project called Play, which is our sort of music manager at GitHub. You can request which songs, and you can make fun of everyone else's musical tastes. And Play involves a lot of different moving parts, different GUIs that you can't really automate and script. But we can still get around this by saying, run this one-liner script, and then we'll take you through the process. Like, go here, download this, install this. And that's kind of a small thing in hindsight, but it's a really big thing. You're making people think less about, how do I actually set this up? If they just have one simple thing to do, it's much easier to get jump-started on whatever project they want to work on. We're able to do this now because things suck less. I don't know if you've looked around. Ruby has gone from suck to not that bad. The last few years, we have Bundler, RBM, Homebrew, Foreman, all these things surrounding the ecosystem of installing things, managing dependencies, running processes. If you ever go back and try and work on an app from 2008, 2007, it's really crazy the stuff that we put up with. So try to leverage these cool tools nowadays and figure out ways to even automate it further. Automation's sort of the idea behind this talk. How can you figure out how to make computers do the work and not yourself do the work? Because we're all really lazy. One idea about all this stuff is just like, how do you manage the Bootstrap process of an app? How do you go from a clean machine to running an app in particular? And we have a couple different things that we do across GitHub, not just our main app, but most of our apps that I wanted to get into a little bit. These are all located in the script directory. Some of these, like Bootstrap and CI build, are in pretty much every project we have. Replicate repo is just in the GitHub code base. I'll tell you about that in a couple seconds. Script Bootstrap we put pretty much everywhere. And it's an all-in-one script that sets up everything that you'll possibly need for that project. So things like dependency checks, do you have MySQL, do you have Postgres, Redis, are all those things running? Any migrations that you have to run, so you don't have to tell people to run dbmigrate or dbcreate or any of that stuff. Sets up all the bundler stuff, installs your gems, loads them into your environment. And then we also use it for asset compilation, because all of our 404 pages and 500 pages are just static pages we want to generate. And we can do that through script Bootstrap. So they just have to run this one command, and they have all this stuff happen for them. We don't have to make them think about how do I get this running. There's a lot of cool tricks you can do with this, basically to speed it up and make it a really fast experience. We just take the checksum of like the gem file, for example, or the assets that we build, and compare them to the local code that you just cloned down. So if there's a difference, you can actually run bundle install and go through that whole process. If there's not, just ignore it and then just skip right over it. The idea is that you want this to be a really speedy process no matter what, because you can put this everywhere. We put it in script server, script console. You can put it in like Rails server or whatever you fancy Rails 3 people use. I don't believe in new Rails. I'm just kidding. And then you can also put it in CI just to sort of help load up your environment. Saves you a lot of time. And this is just great because designers really love this. The last thing you want a designer to think about is like, populating your Redis tables or something like that. They don't even know what the hell that means. So if you can make something better for them so they can just jump right in and get to work, that's going to be really good. Non-technical people, if you have anybody with like translations, if you don't have a separate app, or maybe your manager wants to go and make a copy change or something, if you can just have a very easy way to boot up your app, that becomes incredibly important. And then finally, just developers love this. I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday. How do you expect me to figure out how to boot up an app from 6 months ago? Just don't make me think, and just let me boot it up really quickly, and it's awesome. So that's script Bootstrap. I also want to talk about script replicate repo, which is something awesome we have specifically in the GitHub code base. It's basically a support script that loads production data locally. In other words, it flies your production active record associations to you in development. I spent a lot of time on this plane. Pretty happy about that. Let's actually zoom in and look at my fine work. Oh, it's the Rails core team in the plane. I'll have you notice there is no window at the front of the plane, and that symbolizes the directionless flying that Rails is going in. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I actually have no idea how to make a windshield in Keynote, so I just gave up and made a cheap shot. That's cool. Zed says to be a dick, I think. Something like that. Anyway, what was I talking about? Replicate repo. For us, it's replicate repo because we want to replicate repositories and associated data back into our development environment. But it could be your replicate user, replicate account, post, whatever the case is. And this is all based on a project that's open source called Replicate. Ryan Tomeko made this, and it's all open source. You can check it out. It's just github.com/rtomeko/replicate. And what Replicate basically does is just dumps all of your belongs to and has one associations into your database locally. It doesn't do all the has-manys because otherwise you just have a huge database. It would suck everything down, and that is not what you want. You want it to be really quick so you can just load down somebody's repository really quickly. So if I would use this, if I wanted to clone down, there's a problem in Holman Spark, my Spark repository, I can run this and it'll clone down all of the issues, pull request users, get data, anything that I may need to sort of help reproduce that problem locally. It's not too often that I have to do this, maybe like once out of every 100 support requests, but every now and then that you reach some problem where you try to reproduce it locally and it just doesn't work, or you can't figure out why something's working locally but not in production. So having something like this where you can just quickly just one-off, oh, I'm just going to clone this down, now I have it locally, I can futz around with the data and not have to worry about breaking something, this becomes really powerful. So in general, again, just automate these boring support tasks. Support's a really great place to automate because that's a hard problem intermixed with lots of boring stuff in between it all. Finally, CI build is also kind of cool. It's basically a prep script for continuous integration for us. So we can set all of our environment variables, we can load different GC configuration options into the Ruby that we're testing on, clean your work directory, run all the script Bootstrap stuff from before. Basically anything that we want to run in test, we can just do this all in this one script. So from there, we're not plugging all this stuff into Jenkins or whatever you're using for CI or Travis. You can just put this straight into your Git repo, and you can have this version controlled. So you can start seeing how things have tweaked, how your helper is changing over time. And that's kind of nice, because then no matter how I'm testing it, all I have to do is worry about script CI build. As long as that exists, then I can run it. I don't have to do separate setups externally from there. So with all this stuff, basically what I'm trying to tell you is use computers to do things. For the love of God, that's what they're there for. Anytime you're making a human do something is bad. Use humans to drink with. Use computers to do things. It's helped me out for most of my life. But computers are really good at doing tasks. And if you can automate these tasks, you're going to end up having a happier development environment. Next, I'm going to talk about the stack. The whole overall arching stack of how you work. And this is awesome because it's group participation time. So, I saw some of you with laptops. Everyone lift your laptops up. I've got cords and stuff. Literally, lift your laptops up if you have them. Pretty cool, cool. Now smash them on the ground. Just destroy them, break them. I was really hoping somebody would do that. But no, that's unfortunate. That makes sense, they're expensive, yada, yada, yada. But on some level, probably have an irrational fear about like, oh, I gotta set this back up again, I gotta go to replacement, gotta do all these things. Machines should sort of be expendable from that perspective. GitHub has sort of done that. I could smash this laptop on stage. Do you want to see that? Yeah. You guys are assholes. No, I'm not going to do that. I would get murdered and probably fired and, I don't know, lawsuited or something. I don't know. But what I mean by that is not necessarily the expensive part of replacing laptops. I mean, even with backups, it can be problematic to sort of set everything back up to how you want it, your perfect work environment. So this is what I was talking about earlier. We have automated machines set up at GitHub. Within 20 minutes, you can be up and running and ready to commit to whatever. This is like my third laptop this year. I've had problems with everything. And this has really helped me just get back up to speed really quickly. And the way we do this is something called the setup. This is relatively new. We just started really doing this and hammering away at it in the last few months. On your first day of GitHub, if you ever get hired, we'll give you a nice laptop, whatever you want. And then, again, we'll just give you a one-liner. We'll say, run this, and trust us. You can trust us. And then you can go have a beer or tea or coffee, no matter what time it is during the day. And then 20 minutes later, you can come and hack. And that's incredibly important, to get people ready to get going and start working on things right away. The way that sort of works, you just run gh-setup and then a project. So I would run gh-setup GitHub to pull down the GitHub repository, and then that will set up my environment to install and manage all the processes and make all that stuff work really well. The setup manages about 50 different services and apps. All of the dependencies, all of the processes, make sure they're spun up and working all the time. And this number is going to definitely grow over time. We want to shove a whole bunch of different dependencies and just manage everything. Some of the things that it does is it installs Dropbox. Dropbox is really big for us just in terms of sharing, different stuff that we don't want to put in Git. It's just a nice way to have everyone else on the same page. It installs Homebrew, Chrome, 1Password, any of these sort of apps that most people would probably want to opt into. You can either opt into it or they're installed by default. Obviously, we install all the dependencies you'll need, all the databases, of which there's a lot now at GitHub, and then RBM. and all of that sort of stuff too. So you don't have to worry about any of that. The last thing a designer, for example, wants to learn about is React or something, and forcing them to install that is insane. And then the other cool thing is that it manages configure information too, which is also, it's sort of not thought about. You usually think about dependencies. So we can help turn on full disk encryption for all of your employees, make sure if their laptop gets stolen or lost, your data is still safe. We can help install VPN and figure out all the certs and stuff and make sure that you can connect securely to the places that they need to connect to. And then make sure that your screensaver has a screen lock on it just in case. You can have a full disk encryption turned on, but if you don't have a screen lock, it's just completely worthless. So by putting all of that in the setup as well, it's really helped us sort of manage the control of all this stuff. We do all this via Puppet. We like Puppet. We also use Chef internally. And then I know there's a lot of other companies toying with distributing a VM to everybody. I don't really care about the technology at all as long as you figure out something that works. And I think it's really been good for us to do this sort of thing. The main fear with doing anything like this where you sort of puppetize everyone's machines is that developers are kind of dicks and they're like, no, I need my special Redis on this port because that's how I've been doing things. So that's sort of the fear, and we've ended up sidestepping that by just making this so much easier. Like, it needs to be a much better process than you doing it yourself. And it totally is. I can jump into any project at all and not have to worry about dependencies. That's kind of a really cool thing. The other cool thing is that it auto-reports any failures. People do a really good job at saying, yeah, I'll tell you if something's wrong, and then they just never do. So if you run into any problem setting up a project, generate an exception, it just logs in to GitHub as you and then creates an issue in your name. And then it gives us a backtrace, gives us your environment, shows us what you've been fiddling around on the setups to help people troubleshoot what may be going wrong. This is just a nice thing to sort of help close that loop and make sure we're all on the same page. So with all of this, I'm sort of saying, use computers to do things. Humans are really bad at doing things, and computers are usually a lot better. So do that. All right. Let's talk about the deploy. Don't handle your own deploys. The Ruby community has done pretty good at this over the years with Capistrano, Vlad, the I Hate Capistrano team, and all that other stuff going on. So we've been doing pretty well for a while. We have two major components at GitHub that help us out with this. One is Hubot, the other is Heaven. Hubot's our chatbot. You guys all heard about Hubot at this point? Lukewarm response, cool. He's built in Node. He hangs around in our Campfire chat room. He also works on IRC, all of the crazy protocols we learned about yesterday. And he has a bunch of plugins. He can add mustaches to images. He can deploy our site. He can do a lot of stuff internally at GitHub that I'm probably not supposed to say in public because it's probably embarrassing for us, but we like it because it's very hilarious and keeps us laughing. So Hubot's really cool. Like I was saying, though, he helps us figure out deploys. So at any time, I can run into Campfire and say, Hubot deploy X to Y. And that's sort of the generic way of doing things for us. So I can say, deploy GitHub to production, and that will deploy the current master of GitHub to production, to all 60, 70 pairs of machines that we have right now. I can also say, deploy GitHub to production /FE, and deploy just to a specific machine class, just our front ends, or our file servers, or whatever the case is. Or I can say, deploy Smoke, another project, to a specific pair of servers, just so I can, play around with that. It's again sort of a way of limiting your exposure in case I push a bug, so you don't see the spike that Travis saw when they deployed and had all those exceptions. I'm just kidding. Although don't make stuff break. So if you do make stuff break, you're limited to the exposure of how many people see that. And then something we use a lot is to just say deploy a specific branch to production, and then you will only deploy that branch to that specific server. That's usually our workflow. We'll deploy a branch, make sure that's okay. After 10 and 15 minutes, we'll merge it back into master, and then open it up for everybody else. Hubot doesn't have much logic going on here, though. Most of the logic surrounding deploys is in Heaven. And Heaven's just kind of a small Sinatra app. It's an API to Hubot. It also has a command line interface. And it speaks Capistrano or Heroku or Rackspace Cloud or whatever we end up deploying our apps on. And it just it knows all of what needs to happen to take code from here and put it over there. I've never even had to deal with any of this stuff because whoever made this did all that logic, and now I can just reap the benefits of just having my stuff deployed without having to think about any of that. One thing we've been doing with Heaven the last few months is figuring out better ways to lock deploys. Because you don't want people deploying on stuff on top of each other. Especially if you're doing specific branches. Usually the reason you're deploying a branch rather than deploying master is that something may go wrong. And it's a sort of a cautionary measure. And if somebody deploys on top of you, well then you totally ruin all of your data. You don't know which exceptions go to which branch. It becomes confusing. So you want something to lock out other people from deploying on the specific machine you're on or the specific machine class that you're on. So the quick workflow here is that, one, you push a branch up, and then immediately CI starts a build because you can't deploy a broken build to GitHub. Hubot just says no. Once the build passes, you can deploy that branch using any of the options I mentioned earlier, and then Heaven prevents those deploy conflicts so no one else can deploy on top of you. And then you merge the branch based on the hooks we can see come in, we see that merge, and then Heaven says, okay, you're probably done with this branch. It'll delete the branch, the remote branch on GitHub, so we have nice clean branches. And then finally Heaven unlocks the deploys. It seems like a lot of words, but it seems very natural when you're working on it. You just don't want anybody else to mess with when you have production. So with Hubot and Heaven, it's caused us to be much more flexible, safe, and easy. Again, this is incredibly important because we want people to be shipping all the time. There's a blog post that came out a few weeks ago. I don't even remember the numbers, but we were deployed 200 times that day across a lot of different apps. But we like to deploy a whole bunch. We like to deploy very small things. A number of times we've had 4 or 5 separate code bases in production based on people deploying separate branches to separate machine classes and separate servers all at once. And if you do that, you can sort of, it's kind of a rational anarchy. Everyone's set up in a system, they're worrying about their specific part, and you're not stepping on people because we have these controls in place and it's not very restricting. So basically what I'm saying is use computers to do things. I like computers, I think they're kind of cool. Okay, finally let's just talk about the company a little bit because there's a lot of stuff about the company that is also important. Basically, take away the bullshit. So Scott Chacon gave that hour-long keynote yesterday about looking at first principles and sort of how we kind of work at GitHub. What he should have said is just take away the bullshit. So I just summed up his talk for you in 4 words. Sorry, Scott. You gotta catch up. But just by being an employee or a member of an open source project or whatever, being on a team somewhere, there's a lot of overhead, a lot of processes, a lot of logins, sites, passwords, all of these things you have to mentally keep track of. And you can't automate away all of this stuff, but you can help make this sane, make people deal with this a lot better. So there's a lot of ways to just deal with all this bullshit. One, you can reduce it. We try to OAuth everything. For us, we have all of our employees OAuth via GitHub, which makes sense, or you can have your employees go through Twitter or make your own OAuth provider. But the whole idea about this is that you don't have passwords strewn all about in some insecure manner. You just have people worry about their own authentication, and then they don't have to worry about anything. We have like 50-some internal apps under OAuth. I actually don't know if that number is remarkably accurate, but I'm going to say that's probably about true. We have a lot of different apps, and we actually have a couple different gems that you can just load internally. One checks to make sure that you are a GitHub member to our organization. And we have these gems for Sinatra, we have them for OmniAuth and Rails, and you can just drop these into your app that you're doing. And you don't have to worry about setting up authentication, setting up passwords, doing any of that stuff. Other ways to reduce it is to basically just build helpers. Figure out, this is a lot what Scott was talking about, figure out inefficiencies in your process and then do something about it. One example that we have something internally called Team, and it's basically a communication app for us. It's kind of like a mini Twitter, slash like a kind of project management. It's a way of telling people what they're working on. We also use it for gripes a lot. If somebody's really pissed off about, I don't know, some process or expenses or something that's bothering them, getting people to first of all understand that somebody's really upset about something usually can spur someone to be like, all right, well I can fix this. I don't want you to be really upset about the way we order groceries every week. If you have a better way to automate bringing that in, and I help you out with that. And building all these sort of tools to help people communicate better is not wasted time. Beyond that, you can clarify the bullshit. I don't know what that means, but just go with it. Figure out ways to clarify things, basically. You can write a guide, and that's what we ended up doing. It took us a long time, but we finally have a guide now. So on your first day, maybe during the time when you're building all of the GitHub stack in those 20 minutes, you can just go through the guide. And it says a lot of stuff about our motivations, what we think about development, deployment, stuff like that, to here's how you get health insurance in case your leg falls off, to very fun things as well. And it's been nice because this wasn't super difficult to write. We just had to sit down and do it, but it's actually had a pretty big impact because you have some central place where you can tell people to go and they understand more about your team in general. Other ways to clarify is just make it accessible. We have a lot of different TVs around the office, just in terms of performance, in terms of exceptions or new users, stuff like that. And if they're tucked away on an app somewhere, then you have to go to it and stuff. So we just try to make it clear and accessible about how people can see these things. We have a monitors app basically, which just runs on a bunch of iPod touches, because they're only like $200 or something. You just plug them into TV, and then we can push these from HuBot and say, I want this graph on this screen. That's pretty cool, but the point is that you can get this sort of communication up and center and just making it more accessible so people can figure out what's going on in the company. So basically what I'm trying to say here is use computers to build things that can help your organization scale to the extent that new hires acclimate without a lot of stress, because stress sucks. So that's mostly what I want to talk about, those 4 big things. The phrase we use internally a lot is just automate everything. And that's why we got to 120-some people without any managers. We spend a lot of time, we kind of go out of our way to automate things as much as possible. That's sort of the thinking. Long-term benefit will always outweigh short-term cost. Sometimes I'll go and often do something for a week on some app that is not directly related to us making money. And even sometimes afterwards, I'll be like, well, this is cool, that was fun, but will this make a lot of sense? And then I can't think of a time where it didn't make sense in hindsight. Back when we had about 1 or 2 people doing support at GitHub, one of them, TechHub, is just like, well, I don't like the support tools we're using. I'm just going to build a shell on top of that and just send API requests back and forth to help me sort of triage issues and deal with them. I'm just going to make it for me. And that probably took like a week or 2 or whatever, and it was really ugly. But over time, over the last year or so, we've had everybody jump in and sort of start building up this tool. And we've spent a lot of time building it, but now you have the whole support team is, 12 people at this point, and they're all using this, and they're all saving tons of time, and more importantly, they're saving tons of frustration on this. So what initially may be something that doesn't make sense, it definitely makes sense in hindsight. And I think that's the key of what GitHub has done, is that we go out of our ways to automate shit that sucks. And the first thing that goes when a company experiences troubles is hack days. They're like, oh, well, we like your hack days, but we're going to do real work this Friday because we have a deadline or something. And that sucks. You can't let your company do those sorts of travesties. So that's what I got. Thanks.
So, questions?
Yeah, having scaled so much to so many employees, how do you handle?
Who the hell is talking? Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Having scaled to so many employees, how do you handle scaling communication? I mean, email and chat rooms in Campfire. Do you have many chat rooms per project, or?
Yeah, a whole bunch of different ways. There's no real one answer there. We try to use, we don't do any meetings and stuff, as Scott was mentioning earlier. So we do lots of pull requests. I want to say we do 20 or 30 pull requests a day, and usually all of them get deployed that day. So we spend a lot of time communicating that way. We send email a fair amount. We use the Team app a lot. And then Campfire rooms, I don't even know how many we have now, maybe 50, 60. Usually, a lot of them are temporary too, where somebody will be working on, we just had an app sort of tracking applicants through the hiring phase. And that was sort of a big push for 2 or 3 people over the course of like a month. So there was spent a lot of time in that specific chat room, but now that it's sort of shipped, traffic has decreased. So basically, we've been really aggressive in splitting rooms out. Otherwise, you just have lots of overlapping chatter, and that doesn't help anybody out. You're just talking at that point.
Hey, Zach. Heaven, is it open sourced?
I don't think so.
Will it be?
I heard it was going to be about a year ago. So I don't know. It's one of those things that like we'd love to open source everything, but it's not just flipping a switch. Open source is much more about supporting stuff. And the last thing we would want to be like, hey, use this, and then fuck off, I don't want to see you. And so it's something that we may open source in the future, maybe. But
what are you using for continuous integration for tests?
So we use Jenkins right now. And we also use Janky on top of Jenkins. Janky is open source, and that's sort of our GitHub sauce on top of CI. And that handles lots of the notifications between GitHub and Jenkins and Campfire and stuff like that. So that's just github.com/github/janky. And we've been pretty happy with Jenkins for the most part, so. Says the Travis guy.
As for CI, I know that Defunct created CI Joe some time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And have you been using it?
CI Joe went defunct like 2 years ago, I think. It was very sad.
Okay.
We ended up switching to Jenkins like a year and a half ago, and it's been pretty good.
Okay.
Although I think there's still a CI Joe community. I think people are still maintaining it or something.
So I guess there are no more questions. So thanks, Zach.